Hi, everybody, and welcome to The Love That Loves You Back, a podcast between myself, Valerie and my dear friend Jonathan Fremantle. I'm an artistic miscreant, otherwise known as a self-described third generation art professional, who's currently raising a fourth generation art professional, born in the depths of the Pale of Settlement in the former Soviet Union, partly raised in Australia. 15 years ago, by a quirk of fate, relocated to Zimbabwe, where I'm the co-founder of First Floor Gallery Harare, trying to figure out life, education, art, and predominantly love of art.
Hi, Jonathan Fremantle. I grew up in Cape Town and studied in London. I did a long apprenticeship in fine art in the old sense and have been making art in one way or another ever since then. I live in Edinburgh now, but I also lived for a while in Johannesburg where I had Hazard Gallery. And that was the context that I met Valerie. Just loved the conversation we had immediately about painting and how painting is everything. That conversation's been a constant source of joy and sustenance over the years. So it does make sense that we share the conversation.
We always come back to art because it is the love that loves us back. Hi, everybody. We enjoyed our conversation with Abdollah Nafisi so much last year that we definitively, I think, agreed to invite him back. And right now we're discussing hardware as it happens to be. If there was some kind of a visa system or a genuine passport for the art world, it would require you to have a robust knowledge of the geography of hardware stores around the world. I actually just saw and this will date the conversation, unfortunately, but I just saw the video you sent me from your BBC interview. And I thought, aha, my advice about not being goaded into answering questions by the media worked. I thought it was fine when Abdullah told me that he was being interviewed by BBC, and I said, don't allow yourself to be trapped by any of the questions, and also insist on being an expert in your field and just speak to being an artist and as an artist, and don't try to be forced to be somebody you're not, like a military expert or strategist, especially because we're all relying on the same amount of extremely limited and highly contextualized information that we're being allowed to see. And that's what you did. You just kept it really human and said, this is who I am. This is the reality of things. And you don't need to be political to say everyone wants to live in peace. But also, what I really loved is at the end of the conversation, you said that you wanted normalcy is really underrated as an imperative. And I think the reason it's underrated is because in the first world, it's just that's the default and you don't notice it. It's the same as privilege. Like the sort of normalcy that you're describing is a form of Western privilege that is invisible until it is gone. And it's only visible in countries and in societies in crisis and only in comparison. So they respond by what happens in context of trauma. And then when they have experience of normalcy, they respond by complaining the whole fucking time, right? Until they get tired of complaining, which is, I'm describing my experience in Zimbabwe, that after just freaking out and complaining every time something goes desperately wrong, you kind of go, we will figure it out. And you develop, what is known as, or what people popularly like to call resilience, which is also a hateful quality in some ways, because on the one hand, it's treating adaptation to terrible situations as something, as an admirable skill, right? And I think we're just kind of in this world which is precious. What is it like to be an artist? Let me ask you what the BBC should have asked you. What is it like to be an artist and an Iranian artist at a time like this? What does it make for your practice? Does it put different pressure? Because we're all going into a period when everyone will be reporting on Venice Biennale, and I'm extraordinarily conflicted about the whole project. And this is like for the first time in 20 years, thinking of what is the whole point of doing any of these things. That's just kind of my moment. What is your moment? What I mean is there is more questions than answers. And so when I speak to colleagues around the world, a lot of people are just coming out with kind of a position around the art world is something has to change, or we need to change something, right? But no one's coming out with what that is, right? And Venice Biennale is actually, in many ways, a place about things staying the same. It is a form of establishment. I mean, it's a precarious establishment considering the city is drowning, and I think that makes it precious. But it is also a place of kind of self-indulgence in history. At least that's how I experience it every time I go there. It's beautiful. It is enormously enjoyable, to be there. I'm not feeling that now is the time to be, in many ways, enjoying something. Now is the time to be quiet and think, I guess, feel for what is the moment calling for, because I'm not sure that the moment is calling for pretending that things can continue the way they are, whatever those things are. And I think we've drifted so far away from art as a core value, both in the direction of art as politics and art as wealth. I think for me, maybe what the moment is calling for is saying art is not this and art is not that. Can we be quiet in this moment and focus on what we actually can do as artists and not what we proclaim to be? This is not a very coherent position in some ways, but it calls for feeling and quiet. That's kind of my feeling. I mean, I'm also trying to justify a whole lot of things. I mean, it could be entirely personal. Also, because I'm not going for the first time in 20 years. It's possibly me trying to avoid FOMO, but I also had a very strong feeling, even last year, saying that this year, I don't feel good. Like would be the first time that I don't feel good about going to Venice. And I don't know. And every year I've always felt that this was just my absolute gift to myself, to be part of a community and part of a tribe, and the feeling that we're part of a tribe. And I just don't feel like this year can deliver it. I mean, I'd love to be proven wrong. Anyway, that's end of my rant.
I would like to dive into your question to Abdollah about when we spoke last time. You spoke about this incredible time you spent working with these tribal cultures in Iran and the spiritual and kind of ritualistic manifestation of their essence, and how that's infused itself into your work and your practice. And, without invoking that terrible name Trump, but, when he speaks about erasing a culture, there's this pressure to respond in some way from my side. And I can only imagine what that feels like for someone who's felt the love and the kind of spiritual significance of that place, what it means. It's not a question of, what do you think? It's really more, to me, is like, how do you be an artist in the face of that violence? What is the artist? And I would say artist, you could also read the spirit of you. How does that work in such oxygen-starved, sort of violent atmosphere?
Well, it's a very timely question. Thank you for asking that. I wish I could measure. That would be very interesting if we could measure how people feel and the measure of the pain and joy. How do we feel in each moment? So I really can't claim that what we're all going through, I have more share of it or less than you do. It just depends on how much do we sense the essence of humanity, I think, So it really, that removes the borders, and it really thinks about where we are as human, culturally in different locations that we are. I was thinking about the elephant in the room. I think in previous podcasts we talked about like Greek used to debate with one another. The fight was over the topic of the debate. The fight wasn't with one another. After the debate would finish, people would just probably have a coffee as philosophers and stuff too. But we are, I think, in a time that everything has become personal. It's just almost that it's my point and you should not exist. It's either my point or nothing. So now imagining this elephant is in the room and everyone from different angles are saying, oh, they're touching the leg, and they say this is a tree, and they're touching the other part and say, oh no, that's probably a knife. We are at the point that we are killing the elephant. The elephant is life, So as long as we debate over the elephant, that's fine, but we are killing the life. We're talking about like getting rid of the elephant. So I think that's where we are at. And I think that brings me back to what Valerie was talking about, the question. So what are we going to do? What is the solution? So what is an artist going to do at this time where whatever we shout, whatever we do, no one's really going to listen. So what's the point? It's a very interesting time that I've been thinking quite a lot about future. I feel like we're not talking enough about future. And as artists, I feel that this is where the question becomes a little bit like design, but questioning what sort of future do we want? Because obviously the future that we planned in 50s and 60s is what we are living now. It's not working. And so where do we start? And I think we should start from defining now. What does now really mean? Really, really understand the context of now and understand the context of our problems, what we have achieved. For example, one of them is it seems that most of the ways that we had predicted the future and the future that we wanted was everything faster, 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 faster. You know, the idea of perfect, something that is just so shiny, and maybe looking at future and celebration of the imperfections and celebration of a slowness and looking into wanting less as a more new fashionable thing. That could be one way of looking at the world towards the future. Similar thing what Germano Celante in 1967 talked about, the curator, of artists really reducing the cost over their lives so that they can make more quality of works, and they really think about their material. Arte Povera manifesto, which was really interesting to read. And I think these kind of ideas, going back to them and placing them in the time and space that we are in now, is very critical. You know, we have this question of, oh, we should come up with something brand new, the original, you know, this dilemma of original. Oh, it's not original. Then therefore, actually, I think that picking up the right debate that has been done already, but placing it in our time is just going to work completely different. It's a very different soil, very different chemistry of environment that we are living in. So bringing the right question that had been asked before, placing the time now and questioning the future, I think is the answer. We need to be talking about future. We need to be talking about just debating the future. And I think that's fascinating.
You're incredibly right, because as you are speaking, that we need to speak about the future. We don't talk about the future at all, like anymore, really. We don't seem to. And you said we need to understand the now. I mean, what concerns me is that we seem to live in a world where we no longer have a shared understanding of words, which makes it really difficult to have conversation. And that's part of the struggle, like almost anarchic approach to language and meaning that has arisen. What you were describing before is almost like psychiatric pathology, right? Where people become personally identified with their political opinions to the point where it becomes fused with their identity, which means that a negation of an opinion becomes a negation of self. And that's a pathology. I didn't come up with this. I was reading something and watching, and I thought that was actually interesting because a lot of the current present very psychiatrically. It is a mania. But again, we're more now, I think, than we've ever been, right? Because we don't talk about the future and we've forgotten the past, right? But the past has not forgotten us. So the only thing we can actually think about is the future. I don't know whether it is the most confusing time ever, because I was also listening to a podcast about history of the Renaissance, and again, which is also very instructional, because a lot of shocking and terrible things were happening all the time, and they seemed also quite intractable, and like anything from the Black Plague and Inquisition and constant war and human life expectancy being a lot shorter than it is now. And I would imagine those times felt quite apocalyptic. So I'm just wondering whether, in hindsight, in 30 years' time, we too will see this, provided we're still around, that we will see something differently or have a perspective. But to get back to the idea of talking about the future, like, what are some of your kind of aspirations for a world that is so divided now? Thinking as an artist, and artists are often expected to think perpendicularly to the mainstream, right? What makes our opinions or views valuable is that they come seemingly out of nowhere and they're not like anything that someone else would come up with, right? That's my impression. At least it's my experience. So speaking as an artist who's not going to be a builder of society, but somebody who can be a dreamer for society, how would you speak to a future and about a future from the now?
I just want to deposit into that question your recent work. I just saw it online, was part of a show. Beautiful sculpture with burnt wood. And I thought that it had the quality of something, you talk about slow, imperfect. And I think you also mean from the heart, and felt, made by a human. And that sculpture to me really did epitomize that kind of very high standard. It's something that felt as if it might have been around forever and was uncovered in some sacred ancient site. And yet it felt as arresting as an exclamation mark might feel in the sentence. So perhaps you'd like to just answer Valerie's question and maybe circle in with that artwork and tell me a little bit about where that came from.
I'm sure everything is connected, I'm sure that my answer is in dialogue. We need to keep talking to one another. I have a friend, Yazdan, he's a filmmaker in Austria. He works with Ars Electronica. And we talk for hours just to get each other's paradoxes out. It's very interesting how in the world of algorithm, where you just seek what already approves your thinking, it's very difficult to be able to criticize oneself. So we always think that I'm right, of course, because I'm looking at the algorithm that already approves my thinking. So how can we become better at debating and understanding one another's point of view if we don't debate one another? Long conversation, pick up a phone. Hey, I have this idea or this question. Do you have time? And then go through that. These podcasts, we really need to do it so much. As you very well mentioned, it's human, really emphasize on the critiquing one another and learning and finding again those paradoxes that we have within ourselves. And that leads to understanding the time that we are in. So now, I think we're so obsessed with living in the moment and living now. I think my criticism is that it's a very Western thing, because we can actually in West live in now. It is not possible in an economy that's constantly changing to be able to live in the present moment. You constantly have to change and imagine. You're always in this ready state that you need to be able to survive or think about your family the next day. So the future becomes an incredibly personal and important matter. But now if you bring it into the context of we as artist culture, as you call it art world, we really start defining what does it mean to be now? Because we need to have a measure of what is now to be able to see that, yes, we are actually talking about future. If we haven't really understood the circle, it's becoming like a bit tumble dryer. It seemed to be repeating itself. So we are in a very lucky time to be able to define what now exactly is. So put it as a measure, reference, and then we can talk about the future. And what sort of questions do we have? And I still think that it is not appropriation or anything negative, that if we go back and start borrowing from where people have left off. So, for example, I think a lot about minimalism. And I still think minimalism is so understated. It needs to be really improved more. I think we can work on it again, go back to it with new eye. I feel like it started, it turned into a bit of a trend, and it lost itself in the fashion. What I mean by it is that putting the object in the space, reducing so much from everything that we want, all of these desires and working them out, looking at this simple object or a box in the middle of the space, where the dialogue of a space and our presence in the space becomes very important. So then now talking about there's object, there is a space, and there is body. Let's start from there. Maybe that's the future we're looking at, where presence of the body matters as much as the space, as much as the object. and we're feeling all of that. There is time, there is emptiness, so that we can sense these. Whereas everything is so packed and full, almost. I sometimes find myself that I need stimulation all the time to be able to be relaxed. So what has happened to me? So I have to sometimes decode myself. That's where I am, and I'm not Nostradamus, but I believe that we have achieved the answers. We need to start, as Valerie very well mentioned about the history, start going back to our history. In my opinion, even modern histories, sometimes there's so many good questions being asked. And as we said in the previous podcast, really embrace the I don't knowing element and be excited about that we don't know together, instead of like constantly trying to find answers, asking better questions and refining the question and deducting elements from that so they will be useful for everybody, and not overly academize everything, so that accessibility is something that constantly question, bringing everyday wisdom into the debate, I think. I remember that David Wojnarowicz had 1980s had an interview, and he was complaining about the academical language, how inaccessible it is. People are talking about valuable things that people don't understand what they are. So I think that bringing that language in a way that a 12-year-old would understand, that people can join the debate, I think that's one of those things that I would love to myself participate in and be there.
Something that occurs to
Yeah.
me, which I think is super interesting, which is often these kind of future visionaries, people that were given that kind of cultural status, many of them would speak of observing the present accurately, the ability to be present and to notice beyond your own naming of things, the actual reality, the truth, or at least into the truth of this present moment. And certainly as a painter, and I'm discovering now in sculpture as well, there is a kind of edge of the present and the future that you exist in. And you could call it a flow state. I heard a really wonderful quote by Jackie Stewart, the racing driver. He was talking about his relationship with George Harrison. And this is a very ordinary guy who has no deep spiritual undercurrent in his life, but later in his life started to need answers to these phenomena that he was experiencing. And George Harrison, with his connection to meditation in the East, they struck up this strange friendship. And it's in Living in the Material World, this documentary by Scorsese. Anyway, Jackie Stewart speaks about driving at the Nürburgring, which is the most dangerous racetrack in the world. It's now banned. And at such an incredible speed that his body became calm and completely at ease. And he was able to smell grass and know that that smell was the smell of a car that had gone off the track 3 or 4 corners ahead of him. And to me, this is the epitome of what being in the present can read as seeing the future. The ability to be present beyond your own ego. There's another quote I read this morning by Krishnamurti, which says, the moment we tell a child the name of a bird, he stops seeing that bird. If we name it in a way that prevents seeing, the future is not visible to us because the present isn't even visible. And I think there's something so sublime about this function of the artist to see as it is, not see what he sees, to really work to try and see clearly and cleanly. And it's possibly, as Valerie alluded to, when the shit really hits the fan, whether it's the dark times of the Italian Renaissance when Italy was at war, and there's this tiny jewel of Florence and Siena where these geniuses are making art. Or now, there's something strange about this pearl that's being created out of the sort of sand in the oyster. I don't know quite how to explain that, but perhaps you can talk a bit about it.
Yeah, this is the second time the Renaissance comes. I'm not a history expert, however, if I'm not wrong, I think it was Immanuel Kant appeared after Renaissance and talking about all those principles, and people start building on that in the whole Enlightenment era. I cannot emphasize more on the importance of hope and future. It is something that being excited about tomorrow is an amazing thing, Like today, I was thinking about that. Isn't it amazing that at night we struggle to fall asleep because somehow we want to stay awake? There's this joy of the day, this joy of, oh my God, I just don't want this day to end. I want this to last forever. That's life. So somehow that it starts kicking in from the middle of a day. That just it's hard, unless we're totally shattered and we have to sleep. But I want, if I could stay awake forever at night, I would. But in the morning, I want to stay asleep.
You have children.
It is fascinating,
Sorry,
isn't it?
I have to.
In
You
the
have children.
morning,
The question is answered. Only you're going to sleep.
you know. But yeah, but children are different, isn't it? As adults,
Yeah.
5 a.m. they want to be awake and they're excited about the day.
I think we spoke beautifully about where we are as a human, in this kind of context of making art. And I loved what you were talking about, this kind of possibility of rebuilding a future. And we're not talking about a future that involves escaping the planet and going to Mars. We get so obsessed by these kind of science fiction futures, which are a kind of avoidance of something really more magical, which is like building a society, something hopeful. And I think we've also spoken accidentally about the Renaissance, but I think what we mean is other renaissances or these flowerings of art, science, philosophy, religion, etc., which came during times of incredible turmoil. I mean, I would argue that you could put a microscope on any time and discover incredible turmoil, either just around the corner or just recently happened or happening. However, the word that I probably grabbed the most from what you were saying, and you said some lovely things, but the word I want to dwell on more, not just in this conversation, but in my own work and practice, is this word hope. It's such a hopeful thing to be an artist. And faith, I would say, is in the same room as hope. This kind of leap of faith or this investment in hope that will be beautiful or it will be a solution of some kind. What does that mean? What does hope or faith mean in this context of the world we're in and your work as an artist and as an artist who's related to a place geographically in the world which is dealing with a lot of pressure?
Jonathan, can I start by saying I don't know?
Yeah.
you know, but I like to try because I don't want to sound like, hey, look at me, we're having everything figured out. We were talking about a couple of things which I like to merge them together. And so my heart is telling me that that's where the answer lies for me. One was that waking up in the morning, being excited about the day, wanting to finish the sleep and just get out of the bed. This, what we used to do as children. I don't think it is to do with energy or age. I think it's to do with the day has started in my brain. I think in my sleep, oh yeah, I'm excited for the day. Just want to wake up and do art. So that's something that I challenge myself almost every day. Some days I struggle to get up and do art. Some days I just see it as a job, but that varies. However, I want to now bring the other question that came from the very beginning, Valerie question that what does it mean that your family is in war and you still have to make art? How does that work here? I think it's a very interesting state of mind. I'm going to say it here so I can myself go back and listen to it and remind myself. It is a very strange state of mind, which one of my friends once said that it's this mix of survival. You're in a state of survival and you're also in this state of life and being. And on the top of it, you want to create as well. It is this feeling of living intensely every day. I saw a video somebody was sharing, I think it was in Lebanon. The guy was saying, look, I don't know if we're going to be here tomorrow, but right now I know that today I'm going to live so intensely and I feel the life. And I think that's just remembering that is such an amazing strategy for hope because I think hope comes with a lot of motivation, you know. There's motivation there. And then you have this hope that you wake up and you see a positive future. There is this utopia that you believe in. And it is very infectious, you know, when you smile and want to work and excited about working and you know that you're building something moving forward. It is not being done by one person. I think that it's not an individual work. I think we need to start gathering as artists and in this field and work together in these big groups. You know, I think we need to really share our opportunities. We need to share our studios, to share our thinking. I think that is hope, you know, friendship, like moving that subject from the show that, oh, we're going to be working on this topic, and instead bringing a group of friends in the space and then see what dialogue comes out of that. It's exactly like that when you say, oh, that's the bird and that's the name of the bird, and you just lost it. You know, the child loses the excitement of the bird.
I think that comes back to your idea of asking better questions,
Mhm.
because I think that we critique on an ongoing basis is all about prescriptions and didactic projects. We're going to do exactly that, as opposed to creating generative opportunities. That's how I tend to curate exhibitions as well. People say, oh, what is the theme? And I'm like, I don't know. These are the artists that I'd love to see in the show. And I'm sure, we'll see what comes out. I think
Mhm.
something interesting will emerge. That's how you get excited, and you allow space for the artist to be an artist, for an artwork to be an artwork. But also, I thought it was really interesting what you said about minimalism, just to come back to the conversation, is also inserting the body of the audience and the viewer, bringing them back into conversation, because when you're being prescriptive and didactic, you're pushing the audience out of the actual conversation because they're merely a recipient and they become passive. And it's interesting that you say that minimalism is a way of like almost forcing a shift in paradigm onto the audience to re-engage with the art, because now the onus is on them to find themselves in relation to the work and in conversation with it. But it's also a skill set, right? So in a way, I would challenge that as saying, insofar as where you're speaking to kind of a utopian collectivism, let's just say that, among artists, I think, somebody who was born in the former Soviet Union and and who's familiar with what artist unions ended up looking like. And I'm not, I'm not saying that that's invariably the case, right? But in fact, my grandmother ran the salon for the Artist Union of Belarus, which was a special place. So she was like the doyenne of the Minsk art scene, because the salon of the Artist Union was the only art gallery, like commercial gallery in the whole state, right? Republic. And I promise you this, it's not all it's cracked up to be, like collected. But I think you're right that audiences need to be engaged in that. You're preaching to the choir in my case, because I've done a lot of work to re-engage general audiences on the basis of, two eyes hath not a viewer of art, eyes, ears, dimensions, right? To paraphrase Shakespeare. So I think the audiences need to be re-engaged. But I mean, we're in a very complicated right now, where I guess in a way aesthetics and culture are broadcast so widely and broadly and have become accessible to everyone. Everyone who has a phone is a photographer by default. We have sort of global literacy, but so we share so much, and in sharing so much, share so little. And those are the challenges. And I don't know that necessarily the artists are up to that task. But one of the things that I'm thinking about is that even though you say that this moment is one for people to share and to build relationships and friendships, which I agree entirely, I think that in any difficult moment, in a way, the history of the moment calls each one of us individually, and how we respond, we ourselves cannot predict until the moment happens to us. I think I would posit that, because I've been in moments where you surprise yourself with what you do or don't do. And then you say, well, of course, I'm that type of person. And retrospectively, it seems obvious that that's what you would do. But until you're in a moment of crisis or you actually don't know who you are. And the reason I kind of bring this up, and this is like a terrible popular culture moment, but I accidentally watched Trevor Noah's new special, which is, I mean, I'm not going to give a review here. Completely unnecessary. So he was speaking to slavery and Harriet Tubman doing the Underground Railroad, and he said, if I was a slave, I would stay a slave. I wouldn't run away because I just don't believe that I have that courage. And he basically said, I am a clown. And so if somebody asked me to be courageous, I'd be the guy who would be lampooning the slave owner, the boss, behind his back. But no, I don't believe that I have any courage, right? So he just put it out there that he doesn't believe himself to be any kind of hero, which I thought was extremely like healthy. But I also believe that he doesn't know that about himself.
No.
And I don't think any of us know, because while we do have a shared community of spirit, right, even as artists, that our conversation with the universe is unique to us. A lot of these things are kind of crystallizing for different people in different ways, even though we're sharing a moment in the world, but we're sharing it uniquely and discreetly. And this is kind of a razor's edge that we're all asked to walk, right? Being part of something, but also being alone, essentially.
Individuals,
in
yes.
having to negotiate our relationship with God, essentially.
I mean, I think the magic of this kind of being summoned to meet something bigger than yourself is you discover who you are, absolutely, but you also discover a kind of version of yourself that's able to rise and meet that. And sometimes it's destroyed by it. I read an article yesterday about my hero, Richard DeMarco, where he speaks about the need for art in these times as the most important thing. While I believe that, I also question it. What does that really mean? And I think the one small kind of dimension of answer that I can come to is that we are dealing with losing everything and rebuilding on a daily basis. You know, we are in a process of constant revision and upheaval. And then this romantic notion that we can make something afresh, whether you call that hope or stupidity or just sort of blind enthusiasm. And I love your reference. Both my boys are on Easter holidays at the moment, you know, and so if you remove the specter of school, a couple of days ago, Leonardo said to me, this is the best day of my life. He wasn't kind of saying it so that he could hopefully believe it, you know, as we often do with these things. You're in an experience, it's a concert, and you know that you should be feeling this thing. And no, he really meant it. The sun was out and he was seeing his friend, and he was out with me doing something that he loves doing. And he was going to go camping with his friend in 2 days' time, which on his own for the first time. And I really felt it. And I do know what that feels like as an artist, because you can't really make art, real art, you know, and I don't mean art in a kind of top shelf. I mean, you can't really make something that comes from you without that feeling of pure kind of delight that you're going to be doing something better than you've ever done before. And the kind of opportunity and the freedom that comes with stepping away from school. I do believe that there is a function for art in this state. And I do believe that defending that kind of right to stand separately, whether that means sometimes sitting with this incredible discomfort at not being in that state of grace, not knowing that it's there, that it's possible, and you've felt it and you've made work in that state of grace, and you're not in it, and you've got this profound discomfort for not being there. You know, that's the kind of tension and difficulty that comes with this blessing and curse of being given this opportunity to be an artist. But it does feel magical when you have that feeling. You wake up and you go, I'm going to make a painting today. I remember what it was that I left unfinished yesterday, and I can't wait to get back to it. You know that the elves have been working on the works in the studio the night before. While you've been sleeping, these little magical gnomes have been doing things so that when you open the door and you sort of think, is it good or is it bad? And you open it a crack and you look through, and sure enough, it's wonderful. It's
Mm.
everything and more that you hope for.
Exactly, as you're saying, I'm just going to jump in before it just goes out of my, that you have a plant that you think, oh, maybe my plant is dead, and then you suddenly start seeing little
Yep.
bits of leaves popping out, and you say, oh, it's alive.
Mm.
And I think that's what artists are in a society. Until the time that there is art being generated in our society, that's hope. That means that's life. That's excitement for curiosity, excitement for the research and question and things that are coming out of artists. And exactly this process that you were explaining about being in this state that you can't even explain it, but you just want to be in, and you get up in the morning and do that. And that, I think, those are the little leaves on this plant that I think, as until we see that in a society, art is the sign of hope in a culture. And that just means a new spring, moving forward. That's just, as you were talking, this image was starting to create in my head. So I thought that I should share it on the line of hope. I think I can only imagine when an artist is in a state that there's war happening, and
Yeah.
you almost feel like, okay, so what's the point? But again, I think that the future and the hope is something that it exists more than ever, I think.
Yeah.
You see that ray of light. It's almost like camera obscura.
Yeah. Like last week we spoke to an artist who works closely with really groundbreaking, pioneering science. And he's part of a research project where he's included in this team, and he's not the kind of artist in residence in the sense that he's there to just kind of make pictures that describe the research. He's there as an active part of this group of men and women that are trying to discover something magnificent that is yet to be discovered, essentially.
Yeah.
And the potential benefits for society and humanity are vast. And we were talking to him about what it means to be an artist in that space and what is the function. And we came to this lovely area, this fertile ground of, the word artist could also read creativity. What does that aspect of the human makeup bring to a situation where the attempt is to discover something that's unknown? That ability you were talking about, seeing into the future, in a way, that's what creativity is.
So I was going to throw in a very toxic Picasso quote there just to throw the cat among the pigeons. When people were asking him why he didn't join up, enlist as a soldier into either World War I or Spanish Civil War, he said the world needs a live Picasso more than it needs a dead soldier. So on the one hand, it was a kind of a supreme ego speaking. Of course, Picasso, but on the other hand, he was making a point. What he has to give is something very different. And I think, in a way, like if we just, he could have just said, an artist, the world needs an artist more than it needs a soldier, which is also, but he just chose to use his own name.
I don't
So
disagree with him, I mean,
no, but then a lot of artists did die, right? And did enlist in World War One and the Spanish Civil War. And all we got out of it was artist resale royalty in France.
well, he definitely contributed. His Guernica is like a direct response. And
I
you think,
know
yes,
didn't stop anyone. I think it's a hardening thing is to say that Guernica didn't stop any war at all, right? Didn't stop anything or anyone. So what it is good for is not for that. And so art is good for something, but it's not going to do the things that people want it to do. It's not a social tool of any kind, and so it's taking a step back. The reason I always come back to that is just as a point of what is our responsibility as artists. And sometimes the responsibility is what we decide it personally is. In a way, we don't have a communal responsibility because we already have freedom, right? As artists, we have agency, and that agency can be exercised fully. But then history will ask us, where were you? What did you do? People will ask in 20 years' time, what did you do? And the only thing you will be able to say is this is what I made. This is how I felt about it, and this is what I made. And they will say, yeah, we can see that, and this is how we will remember this time in history because you made that. We're in fact making the future right now. As artists, we get to be the future in a sense of the history in the past.
And it's a continuous process, I think, as you were saying, and Jonathan was very rightly saying, that it is a continuous process. I think my practice is not my practice. I think my practice, a lot of it is being borrowed from people that I have studied, many, many artists that I have looked at and fully been inspired, traditions, skills. I think as long as I can create a process that others can come and somehow continue it, that means that we're building this work that never ends. I think that's very, very important. That's very human. And I think also removing almost the pressure of, okay, now we need to make a change that future will be free or be sorted out forever. That's also not possible. I look at the time and the history of art and philosophy, politics and science and everything, human culture in general as a one exercise. That's just as long as it's getting better and getting better, and there's more equality, there's more freedom for everyone. We are heading towards the right direction. It's almost like you rightly mentioned, yes, we did that, maybe we failed. However, next time we did it and we could do it better, Yes, Guernica didn't stop the war, but we are using it as an example today on how we can exercise and build upon that. So I think it's almost like going to the gym, Sometimes we don't go to the gym, sometimes we do, but as long as we go to the gym, and you will at the end have a healthier body, and hopefully good looking.
That's a beautiful point to end.
Yeah, we are, after all, in the field of aesthetics. There's nothing wrong with it.
Nothing wrong with it.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. Thanks so much, Abdollah. This was
Thank you for
another
having me.
good one.